make sure I'm plugged in. Don't break anything. All right, sweet. So, where are we? PowerPoint. Sweet, guys. So, once this sort of loads up, can everyone see that? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Yeah, cool. Can you see that, bro?
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, sweet. All right, so endurance for shearing. So, what is endurance? It's the capacity of something to last or withstand wear and tear. So, essentially, being able to do something for as long as you want without breaking down or wearing out. Okay, so that's endurance. So, when we look at endurance for a start, cool. First thing we got to always ask is what is the goal? Okay, so in regards to sharing, like there's a few different goals that are out there. Like it could be that you want to do an 8 or a 9 hour tally. It could be that you want to win a speed share. It could be that you want to win a show, or it could be that you just want to go in, day out. So if you have an understanding of what the goal is first, and this is from, I guess, from a coach's perspective, if you can understand what the goal is, then you can work towards knowing what things you need in regards to that goal. And that's how you sort of position your training to it. So, for example, like the difference between a show and a world record is obviously like the elite open shows, they might only last 20 minutes, but it's still at a very, very high level of aerobic fitness. So you're still working at a really high level of endurance. Or you could be doing an 8 or a 9 hour record, which is obviously for 8 or 9 hours. So, you're still pumping out the same level of sheet, but it's for a bloody long time. So it's a completely different ball game. And then you get something like a speed share where it's all just pure technique, speed, and power. Okay, so also the other couple of goals that go into this is, are you going to be sharing lambs or are you going to be sharing ewes? Is it merinos? Is it crossbreds? So you got to take into account what those things are. And then probably one other thing I should have put in here is you also got to take into account the person who's going to achieve the goal. Okay, so that's where there's a lot of moving parts to it. For example, at the moment, there's a fella who's going for, he wants to go for a bit of a lamb tally. Cool. Really high level of endurance. Like he's played a lot of high level sports. But, because he's not sharing use, he doesn't need as much high level strength. He just needs a lot of core stability, a lot of muscular endurance, and then just some peak top end speed and just lung capacity to work really, really hard. If it was, say, for another example, we had a 60 kilo woman who wants to go and share, an 8 hour U record. It's a completely different ball game because a 60 kilo girl could be, dragging out 60 or 70 kilo U's all day. Those sheep are essentially bigger than her all day long. So we know that she'd probably do well with a bit more strength training to build up that capacity. And in general, anyone that's sharing any use at all probably needs a little bit more strength because then it just makes them feel lighter. But there's different formats of that, and I'll talk about that on a different podcast, I guess, or a different webinar. So that's the number one thing you got to know for a start is what is the goal, and then we can start to go and work on it. So once we have the goal, cool, we have to start to look at what sort of things that we have to take into consideration. Cool. So are we looking for maximum strength and power? So this is probably where majority of my own training at the moment lies, is because I'm purely just trying to lift as much weight as possible. Someone like Usain Bolt, it's not quite the top end maximum strength and power. Still a little bit of a tiny bit of endurance capacity there, but it's still more power and speed. Then you got things like team sports, your football, your rugby, your hockey, which you still need a high level of strength. You need a bit of sprint, but you also need a little bit of endurance. So you're starting to get down here, but it's more of a stop-start sort of event. And then you got things like fighting. So like a UFC fighter, they do 5-minute rounds. And that whole time, like even though they go in spurts, they might have to wrestle for 5 minutes. So that endurance level is quite high. And then you've obviously got, your marathoners, your triathletes, and your cycling sort of endurance guys. Cool. And for me, this is my belief, I reckon shearing's probably more around here. It's not quite at the marathon, triathlon, and cycling, because there is a high level of strength and strength endurance involved, because you're handling an animal and you're in some really weird positions all day long. So that's where you probably need to be here. So you need to sort of be training a mixture of this and then sort of a mixture of the strength training as well. But it's a bit more localized. You're not training like a power lifter or a weightlifter. You're probably not training like a rugby player. Like some guys will definitely get the fitness for that. But it all depends on what you're trying to do as well. Like if you just want to be a day in, day out guy, probably training around here. And that's what most of our general training is for. But if you're training for a 9-hour U record, you're probably heading down this way a little bit more as well. Okay. Does that make sense? Cool. So it's actually really, really hard to be an elite level weightlifter and an elite level marathon runner. Okay. Like it's just not going to happen. There are in betweens, and I'll sort of show that as well. Because there's some crazy guys out there that have done some crazy stuff. If you look at a guy, for example, David Goggins, he done I think it was the 24-hour pull-up record. And this guy, he just goes and runs ultra marathons, but to have that strength endurance to do pull-ups for 24 hours is pretty hectic as well. But he's also running, ultra marathons of up to 100 Ks, but he's doing stuff in this area as well. But then you also get a guy named Ross Edgley, who I'll show soon. He swam around Great Britain, but all he done, to keep his body together was gymnastics and strength training to make sure that he was good. And he ate a lot of bananas as well, which is pretty cool. So does that make sense where you can't, in general, have both ends of the spectrum? You got to sort of have a bit of a combination of both, especially for sharing. You're probably lying in this sort of area here. So then we go on to, this is probably where most people will go wrong with their training. Is there's two different approaches that you can sort of take to your training. One is the sledgehammer approach and one is the sniper rifle approach. And so the sledgehammer approach is just go fucking hard and try to break down that wall. You might eventually break down that wall, but you might break a few things in the process as well. And you might get a result with that. And shearers are pretty resilient, and I've seen them do some crazy shit. When I stopped shearing, I was training fucking hard, doing probably 3 or 4 hours, of CrossFit a day, and the body can take it, but it's just not efficient over time. And that's where the sniper rifle approach of where you're very, very detailed and very targeted with what you do, you're more likely to hit the target you want. Okay. So does that make sense in terms of that? Yeah, cool. So essentially there are two approaches. One is just fucking give it a bash, give it everything you got, go as hard as you possibly can. And the other one is just be very, very surgical, and it's a little bit more planned and a little bit more focused, but in the long term, you got more chance of hitting your goal. And it takes a little bit more dedication, but that's cool. Sweet. And then the next one, okay, is then you got to start to figure out what methods should you use. Okay. So this is sort of, I've just started putting together on, let me know, 1 second. I think I'm going to have to go, where are we? Just see if I can share this. Can you see that? The methods? Yeah, cool. So this is what I've just built up on the dojo page now, is just a whole page dedicated to building fitness. So what we got in here is our basically our conditioning methods. I'm just going to move this over. So what we need to do is understand what we're trying to achieve. And so once you've got an idea of the goal, once you've got an idea of what the outcome is and who the person is, then you start to select which methods are going to be really effective. And so any endurance sport, generally it's the most efficient person that will do the best over time, the most efficient and the person that can go the fastest for the longest. And this is where you know, the most powerful person that can do it the most efficiently will generally be the one who comes out on top, as long as like their fueling and all of that stuff's on point. So one way I explain it is what you want to do is like with an endurance sport at the top end, you basically got an 80%. That's your ceiling. Once you sort of go over that 80%, that's where you get that like lactic acid type feeling. And that's where you got to sort of slow down, or you get a bit fucked and you got to slow down. So with endurance training, what we want to do is teach you how to be able to stay at that 80% for as long as you can, but also raise the ceiling of your 80% so that, you know, your capacity to do more is actually higher. Cool. And the way we do that is by bringing down your resting heart rate, by increasing the size of your lungs, and by also increasing the amount of like your blood vessels that are in your body, so to targeted sort of areas. So the first way we do that is by using our low intensity methods. Cool. And so this is the stuff that's actually really boring. It's stuff like your low intensity cardio workouts, and you might have noticed we do put some of these in our Share Fitness programs. But basically, it's 20 plus minutes, and you're working at about a 5 out of 10. So you could be just cruising along. If you've got a heart rate monitor, it's probably about 120 to 130 beats per minute, and it's the sort of pace that, you know, you could ride a bike with someone and have a bit of a chat with them, and you're sort of doing that for 20 minutes plus, to start to build up that capacity. And so for sharing, like there's a lot of guys who do a lot of this where they're doing that really long distance stuff, and it can be really, really good. It just depends how much time you've got to sort of make, you know. So like not everyone has the ability to go for an hour or a 2 hour bike ride. So there are some different methods that you can use, you know. But it can be really helpful, especially if you're one of those people that, you know, you fade out, you know, in the last half hour or the last hour of the day, and you know you start to get a bit tired. It could be potentially that this needs a bit of work, or it could be that you're not eating enough as well. So that's a different system as well. Another one is the tempo intervals. So I'm not going to go over all of these ones, but basically like our low intensity methods. These methods are what you make it do it. These are the methods that make you do it easy all day long. Okay. One thing when we were training Stacy for his last record, he said, "Man, like, why does everything feel so easy?" And it's because we basically fine-tuned this energy system so much that like he wasn't working hard at all. And majority of his training before that was like really high intensity stuff, like your CrossFit stuff. And unfortunately, like on the day, his sheep weren't that great. But about a couple of weeks after that, he was sharing some big numbers, and he just said it was just so easy to share these numbers, and he just wasn't getting tired. And that's because like we've done a lot of work fine tuning all of this low energy system stuff. And mostly you're going to use this stuff at the start of like a training program. So for example, if you've got a 12-week program, you know, we do most of this stuff in the first 4 to 6 weeks, and then we start to go some more high intensity type stuff. Cool. The reason being for that is this stuff's actually quite easy to recover from, and it's quite good on the body too. It's almost therapeutic, so it almost helps the body recover. And because you're making your heart bigger and your blood vessels, I guess, denser and have more blood vessels, you're able to push more blood and oxygen around the body, and it just makes everything a lot easier. Cool. So that's the low intensity methods, and there's a heap of videos on here, so you'll be able to see all of these as well, and they sort of explain them a bit more. Then we got our moderate intensity methods. So these methods are what we use to start to transition into the higher intensity methods. Cool. So this is where we're talking about like the sledgehammer versus the sniper rifle. And so the sledgehammer approach is more like just fucking go hard with the high intensity stuff, like your CrossFit, your HIIT training, and you know, your really high intensity interval stuff. But where if you got a sniper rifle, you can sort of really fine tune that low end stuff. And then you can start to take some of these methods and then start to take what you've built from that low end stuff and start to fine tune your engine so that once you start to really push the gas, everything's just humming along, and it's just a really smooth transition. And then you don't get tired and you don't really blow out, and it makes a big difference. Hey, so yeah, basically these methods are your mid-level methods, and they will help you develop more firepower, but also help the body recover after a heavy or high intensity sessions. And for the guys that like, once we start to do some of these higher level programs, you'll find that we use these as our recovery days. The good thing about them is they're actually improving the endurance of your fast twitch and the fibers that allow you to get a lot of power output. They're actually starting to make them fitter, but they're also helping everything else recover. So it's a really nice method to improve your endurance, but also make you recover faster. And when you recover faster, you actually get fitter faster, which is pretty cool. So that's another thing of like taking that sniper rifle approach. And I've found this stuff to be really, really effective for myself. And a few CrossFit athletes we've used it on, like they can't believe how much easier everything feels. But that's what endurance is. It should sort of feel easy, you know, as much as anything can. And so we got different methods for this. You can use stuff like sleds, assault bikes, you can sprint, you can do different things. This is where we start to also bring in a bit of strongman conditioning. So starting to transition from just your basic, cardio machines to make it a bit more functional and a bit more, I guess, targeted towards shearing. So you use stuff like farmers carries, you start to use a bit more core. You might use some kettlebells and stuff like that, just to make it a little bit more closer to the sport that you're trying to improve. Cool. Sweet. And then we have our high intensity methods. And so this is something I was thinking about earlier on today. And so if you've got someone who's aiming to break a record or doing a tally, generally as you get closer to your record day, whether it's 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out, you're actually probably going to be doing a lot more shearing and putting a lot more intensity into your shearing. And this is where you want to transition from gym work to mostly shearing work. But when you start to incorporate some of these higher intensity methods, so the thing with these, it's only 30 to 60 seconds. At the most, you might be doing up to 5 minutes. But for that time, you're working really, really hard. And if you're doing these, and if we say it's like 30 seconds and you get off and you're like, you don't really need a rest, you're not doing it right. Like you should get off that, whatever you're doing, say it's a rower or a bike, you should get off that bike and you're fucked. Cool. And it's like your lungs are hurting. I did a session with one of my mates one time and I was like, bro, I just want you to fucking push me. And it was a big mistake. Okay. But what we did was 5 rounds of 90 seconds on the rower with 5 minutes full rest. And by the third one, my legs were just starting to lock up because it was 100% effort every time. And the last one, like I couldn't tell whether my legs felt like they were being crushed or wanting to explode. And I was just like, this is fucked, eh? And that literally wrecked me for about 3 hours afterwards. And it was probably 6 or 7 minutes of work. But what you're doing really there is taking everything you've built from that low intensity stuff, taking the stuff you've built from the moderate, and then really making your body use as much oxygen as possible. So really getting that top end level of fitness. And so when you are doing like a shearing tally or something like that, because it is a lot shorter, it requires less time. And then you can spend more time fine tuning your shearing, so it's a lot better to have at that end of the shearing program to make sure that you're peaking at the right time, but not doing too much. Okay. So, and that's where we use that. So in regards to like the sniper rifle approach, where you sort of want to be is like you do your work here. So this is your foundation. This is the base of your pyramid. The wider you can make that base, the higher that top end and that peak is going to be. So once you've built your base, you start to bring in a few more transition methods. So your moderate intensity. And then when it's time, anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, you're probably going to start to introduce these and then really, really fine tune everything you can possibly do. And that becomes like, this stuff's really hard, but if you do this stuff too early, because it is quite taxing, you're going to wear out and you get tired, and you know, just things happen. So that's why you got to sort of time it with this, but it's really cool. And so, yeah, does that make sense? Sort of how that works? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, bro.
Sweet. So once you've sort of selected what methods you're going to use, and then there's different approaches too, like there's stuff I haven't put in here just yet, but there's things like with shearing, there's a lot of local muscular endurance. So that's where you're trying to basically force the muscles that you're generally using for work. So those are things like your lower back, your core, your legs. You're forcing them to work really hard. So you're actually targeting and isolating those muscles. And that's where the weight training can come in a lot. It'd be good to actually pull up a program, but let's say you've got something like lunges are really good for shearers. So what you can do is, if you want to bring up the local muscular endurance, what you can do is like you do a lunge and it might be 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up for 60 seconds. Okay, so you're really keeping tension on that movement and you're moving the whole entire time. But what that's doing is forcing blood to be trapped in those muscles, and it's forcing those muscles to really work for a long period of time. And that's where the strength training and the resistance training can really come into, becomes really handy. And that's where, like, if we skip back to here, this is where this stuff comes in. So if we're just training for a marathon, a triathlon, or you know, some sort of endurance event, you know, it'd be fine just doing running, rowing, or you know, the bike. But because you're also handling a live animal and you're in some weird positions, you also need that strength endurance and that muscular endurance. And that's why the strength training component is so important. And that's why, you know, having that sprinkled throughout the program is super, super important. Does that make sense? Yeah, sick. Cool. Cool. And then the next thing is like, one of the most important things is what body do you need for the job? And so this is this fellow Ross Edgley I was talking about. So in this photo here, he's probably about fucking 5%. Like there's not much fat on him, but he's also extremely, extremely fit. I'm pretty sure there, he was just doing some like ultra marathons and stuff like that. So very, very light, doesn't have a lot of body fat, but his fueling is probably like, he's probably going to tap out, you know, within a couple of hours, unless he's really, really sharp with his fueling and his endurance. And this is also him when he swam around the outside of Great Britain. So it took him something like, I think, a couple 100 days, and he was swimming the whole time. He basically did 12-hour spurts at a time. He lived on a boat, but he swam around outside of Great Britain the whole entire time. And during that, he ate about 10,000 calories per day. And basically, his goal was to turn himself into a human whale. So he was just plodding along, like he was just cruising along. He wasn't going really, really fast, but he was able to basically maintain that for, you know, a long, long period of time. And I guess if you're thinking about like some of these guys who want to do like a 24-hour share, you're probably going to lean more towards this body type than this body type, you know. And it can be quite important, and like everyone's different. Like for me, if I was this lean, I wouldn't get out of bed. Like I would fucking hate my life. And like you start to actually run into like hormonal issues and stuff like that. But you know, like for someone like you look at like Matt Smith, when he did his tallies, he was about 12%. So you know, like not super chunky, not super lean, but somewhere in the middle. If you look at someone like Sonny Bill Williams, he's probably about 12%, so somewhere around there. Most shearers, you know, 12 to 15% are going to do really well. But if you're doing a long distance event and you got a bit of extra weight on, you know, it's just going to wear you down over time. So getting your body in the right position and the right body fat percentage for your job, for the task at hand, that can make a big difference to your endurance and fitness as well. And that's where, you know, like the likes of Lizzie with her nutrition can be really helpful as well. And also it's like with this guy, when he swam around Great Britain, like he was eating, you know, bananas all day long. So he's basically just keeping sugar in his blood so that he can constantly move and constantly basically just chug along for as long as he wanted to. Cool. Sweet. And then the last thing is, this is where we go back to our sniper approach. And it's, you just got to test and measure, eh? So that's where like tracking your data, doing all your testing at the start of a program. So for example, I use my weightlifting at the moment. Like I did a testing block at the start. We put in our numbers, and then my coach, she spit out a program for me. And then at the end of this block, we'll retest again and make sure what we did in that program, we'll take what worked, what didn't, and then we'll just adjust it and we'll go again. And that's where, like, when you start thinking long term, like let's say you've got 12 months to prepare for, say, a record or anything you want to do. In that 12 months, you can improve so much if you collect the data and then take what you've done, learn from it, and be like, okay, this is how much we improved here. I think this really helped. We'll keep that in the next one. I think this wasn't so good, so we'll chuck it away. And then you just adjust and you keep moving forward, eh? And that's where, like, over time, it gets a little bit boring because you end up doing the same stuff, but you know exactly what's going to work for you. And then you can figure out, like, okay, fuck, all I have to do is go and do this, and I'm going to be in really, really good shape for whatever I want to do. And that's like those guys that have done quite a few tallies or whatever, they actually, like, they take this time to get their body ready because they've done it before. They know what works. They don't have to experiment as much, but they've collected the data along the way, which is pretty cool. See if I can bring, I think it's this one. So this is one of the, this is a bit of an older testing protocol, if it loads up. Cool. So on this sheet here, and I'll share it to the group again, but these are some of the fitness markers that we use to test if you are, to see where your fitness is at and then see if it's improving. So one of the first things is like your weight, your height, your body fat percentage. Something I've used a lot in the past is HRV, which is, it's a really good tool if you're going to get serious about your training, because what it will do is tell you if you're tired, when to train, how much stress your body is under, and it can also tell you how well your body deals with stress as well. When we tested Stacy on this stuff, his stats were fucking crazy. Like, they were through the roof, eh? His HRV was just about as high as he could. And then your resting heart rate. So resting heart rate basically is telling you how hard you're working to stay alive. So essentially, the lower that heart rate, the better as well. And let's say, for example, and this is a bit more real world, let's say you got two shearers and they're both, you know, you want to stay out and the goal is to share 100 run every run for 30 days. Let's say shearer 1 has a resting heart rate of 40 beats per minute. Shearer 2 has a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute, okay? And so they're both sharing along, and to share, they have to increase their heart rate by 60 beats per minute to make sure they're sharing 100 per run. So shearer 1 is working at 100 beats per minute, but shearer 2 is working at 120 beats per minute. So essentially, they're working harder to do the same. Cool. And that's why the fitter you are and the more endurance you have, you know, your 80% eventually becomes higher. And then, so if you're the person working at 100 beats per minute, as long as you've got the same skill set, you can just say, all right, I'm going to step it up a gear, and you've got a lot more in reserve rather than the guy that's already working harder than you. And that's why it's so important to improve your endurance and get that as high as possible. And then even like with rugby and that, you see guys like Richie McCaw, like that guy's heart must be the size of his head, because he was just, but that's what he did for his, like when he was a kid, he just ran around the mountains, you know. And he was just super, super fit, never get tired, and he was just an animal, you know. So CO2 Tolerance Test is a pretty cool one. This is another cool one. So what it basically is, you breathe in and breathe out, and then you got to let your breath just go out of your mouth as long as you can. And so what it will tell you is, like, elite level is like you can breathe out for 90 seconds without needing to take a breath again. If you're in a really highly stressed state, you only get like 20 to 40 seconds. Okay. And so this is something that you can tell, like if you're starting to get tired or worn out, you can do this test. And if you know your normal score is like 60 to 70, but you can only get 20, well then you know, shit, it might be time to take a bit of a rest, or I might just need a bit of a breather, you know. So it's a really good test, and it's also one that will tell you like how well you're dealing with stress and how well you're adapting to your training, which is pretty cool. 15-minute road test is also a good one. VO2 Max. So when I was talking about those high level methods, this is where we start to train that VO2 Max method. And once again, when we tested Stacey on this, he had a VO2 Max of a 20-year-old Olympian in his mid 40s, you know. And it was quite funny because he didn't think he was very fit, but every single health marker or every single testing marker showed that he was extremely, extremely fit, which was pretty cool. And in a way, like it's something I'm going to go into another time, is how to, there's a big difference between fitness and conditioning. So you actually see it quite a lot in like the UFC or, you know, sports where you'll get someone, you know, that's super, super fit, but then, you know, the first round they just gas out. Like guys like Conor McGregor, you know, like, and that's potentially they're just not conditioned to the environment. Like their fitness level might be very, very good, but then when you put them under that stress and under those lights, you know, they're not actually conditioned, and then their stress levels are a lot higher. It's a lot harder to do everything. Their muscles are working a lot harder because they're a lot more tense. And then, yeah, it becomes a big struggle, and that's why there's a difference between fitness and conditioning. So you could score really, really well on all of this stuff, but if you haven't done the conditioning work, the mindset work, then it can fall apart as well. Yeah, but there's a heap of tests in here. So once we've sort of, you know, tested and measure, we retest, we go back. Where is it? Cool. Test and measure, readjust the plan, and then basically go again. And that's essentially how you build fitness, or elite level fitness, for sharing. Cool. So I'll just stop the sharing now. Cool. Unmute tool. Cool. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Do you have any questions on any of that stuff? It's some pretty advanced shit, but it's like essentially like once you sort of realize like you got your low stuff, you got your medium stuff, and your high intensity stuff, and it's about just being patient and taking your time over time, and then essentially transferring that to the shed, and it will just make a big, big difference. Hey.
Wow.
And as you're going through your training programs, it can just be like a matter of just saying, hey, I wonder where this stuff is at, like what sort of part of this training am I at? Because the more you can sort of understand your training, the more you can get out of it, and you can sort of apply it in the way that it's meant to be as well. Any questions, bro?
I'm at the moment, bro, but I'm pretty keen to look through all this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool way. I'm just about to, the conditioning page is on there now, and then I'll upload this replay as well. Cool. Yeah, sweet. Did you find that helpful?
Yep.
Yeah, man. Cool. In regards to like your goals, Daniel, like with rugby.
Yeah.
So you might work a bit more in the middle goals, the middle sort of stuff like that. So it's like the lower end endurance stuff, you're probably getting quite a bit from sharing. But if you really wanted to like peak your rugby fitness, you might spend a bit more time in those medium to high intensity methods. But then if you ever wanted to peak your sharing, you just go through the training cycle. And in the end, you should always just go through the training cycle. But it's just about timing it. So yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, guys, like if you have any questions on that, like obviously like heaps to take in, but you know, as they come up and as you go through it, and obviously like each week, with your training and stuff, just ask questions on it, and like then the more understanding you guys get, the more you can sort of get the best of it. So sweet, guys. Cool. Yeah, and yeah, sweet. If you got any questions, just shoot them through. Other than that, have a fucking good night, and we'll catch you soon.
All good.